Coming up on episode 70 of Omnivore, how flavor innovation nurtures comfort and connection in uncertain times, and why biodiversity matters in building a resilient food system. This is Omnivore, from the editors of Food Technology Magazine and the Institute of Food Technologists.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by IFT membership. To the innovators, the connectors, the changemakers, the future leaders, IFT is your professional home, a global community shaping the future of food. Explore the benefits of membership at ift.org/join.
Welcome to Omnivore from IFT and Food Technology, where we explore the intersection of business, science, and technology in the global food system. I'm Bill McDowell. Flavors have always been at the heart of food innovation, but today they're doing more than just please the palate. They're helping consumers find joy, comfort, and connection in an uncertain world. From spicy mashups to pickle mania to modern twists on nostalgic favorites, the latest wave of flavor innovation reflects how consumers are experimenting without straying too far from what feels familiar. Food Technology's Kelly Hensel spoke with Melanie Zanova-Bartelmy, Associate Director of Food and Drink at Mintel, about the cultural and social forces that will be shaping flavor trends in 2026 and beyond.
Thank you for joining me, Melanie. I'm so excited to talk about flavor trends with you. It's one of my favorite topics, and I know you love it. So we'll just dig right in. And I wanted to start with asking you about, from your perspective at Mintel, what do you see as the forces that are driving the biggest shifts in flavor innovation as we head into 2026?
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so excited to be here talking about flavors and to be talking to you in particular. So, yes, this is, I think, something I would say that is shifting is maybe, to me, an interesting word for it, because it feels like it's accelerating and maybe pushing some things that have already been happening, because I would say maybe the number one influence on flavor trends and food trends in general right now, especially among the consumer groups that are the most interested in trendy things, which to me, the number one thing in that is flavor, really comes from two core demographic groups, and those are Gen Zs and millennials. In general, they are the ones that are most likely to seek out, to go out of their way to try new flavors, to try new types of food and drink. So that already sets them up. But social media is giving them so many different ways for them to discover new things. And we have had some really interesting reports lately that have tapped into that. We have a report specifically on how social media is affecting how consumers behave with food and food service in particular. And some amazing, if you break down the demographics, looking at Gen Zs and millennials compared to Gen X and baby boomers, it's just night and day. But just looking at, they're the most likely to be influenced by social media to try new cuisines. They're the most likely to participate in social media food and drink trends, like trying a new recipe, doing those eating challenges. Yep. My boyfriend's son keeps saying he's going to try the spicy peppers, and we keep being like, do not do that. That's not good. Not that he's a Gen Z, he's younger, but
it's continuing.
And so I think it's interesting because, going to restaurants is still the most accessible way for them to do that. And so that's like 90% of Gen Zs and millennials say they're going to restaurants, not necessarily to the restaurant that's featured. They've got the Chili's like cheese pull. Yeah. And yes, maybe some people are going there, but they're like, oh, I want a cheese pull experience. So then they're going out, but then they're also going and saying, I saw this type of item. Now I'm going to go. I'm thinking about something like the peelers, the candy, and it's like even Walgreens has like a private label candy peeler. So they're going out and doing that. And then something that I've been watching is like the ability for people to order those things straight off of the social media platforms. So that's becoming more accessible. And when I was at the Fancy Food Show over the summer, talking to a popcorn company and they said, these are this flavor, and this is the flavor that's most popular on TikTok Shop. And it's like, okay, so like flavors, being popular in different channels, and then this is a TikTok exclusive. And so then that is even kind of driving this. But then the part that I think is really interesting is, of course, not everybody's on social media in the same capacities. And even if you are, the communities that you engage with, they are kind of much more micro communities than they used to be. Like that water cooler moment where you're all talking about the same thing, like who shot JR, if everybody gets that reference at this point. They're not that anymore. But I've been thinking a lot about how we know when something is still trending or how long that sort of like tail end of a trend is going to last. And I'm sure at some point in here, we'll talk about Dubai chocolate or some of those things. But people are not just talking about this online, they're talking about it offline. And Gen Zs and millennials, 89% of Gen Zs, 85% of millennials say they talk offline about an online food and drink trend. And they're the most likely, almost the same percentages, to say that they send those food and drink related posts to their friends and relatives.
Oh, wow.
So that's, to me, how it says like these trends are not just living online, they're being taken offline. And that's how somebody like my mom in 6 months is going to say, what's Dubai chocolate?
Yes,
and
exactly.
So there's going to be some sort of continuation of these trends, even though maybe that hot moment isn't so hot anymore. And some people have moved on to the next thing. That's why you're going to see some of these things still popping up where like, oh, that more mainstream brand has just launched their version of this thing.
Yep. Like Dubai chocolate, which I see.
Like Dubai chocolate, Kill Wins. I was just walking around and it's like, oh, they've got like little bites now. And that also makes it more accessible. You can try a little bit of something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how your mom's going to see it in 6 months, right?
My mom works in a grocery store. I can't believe she hasn't seen it yet.
True. Good point. And I know that you have, I love the data that you guys are able to pull in. And I know that you said you just recently had gotten in the international flavor data back. And so I wanted to pick your brain and see what are some of the most interesting things you're seeing there. And obviously, like, I'm sure they are going to be aligning with the trends that we identified in our article, but I would love to just see what you thought was the most interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap that your article also has pulled out that I think it makes a lot of sense in the time that we're in. Some of the things like the flavor mashups, the combining of something, say, ranch has been having a moment for quite a while, and something like a pickle ranch or pickle everything, right? Or a buffalo ranch or pickle buffalo, or all these different things, these iterations that we're seeing. It is a way to give consumers something that is a little bit different and unexpected, but also something that is within the bounds of something that still feels approachable and still feels less risky than something that is completely crazy. Right. And I think for a lot of reasons, we have been in a time where we're still worried about our finances to some degree. Not everybody to the same degree, but it's hard to feel like we can just go out and buy everything that we want. And we know to some degree what we can expect from this. I think that's why something like spicy has had as much of a success as it has, because when you think about it, sweet and spicy, we've been doing that forever. Like barbecue sauce to some degree has always been sweet and spicy, tangy. Like that's it. That's what it is. And I think about how this just kind of giving it a new term, it modernizes it. It brings it into a different sort of moment. It kind of introduces that maybe to people in a new way, and it officializes it, and it gives it a new kind of momentum. And that is just enough to give us permission, like in girl dinner, when it's like, oh, we were already pulling things out of our fridge and kind of eating it, off to the side. And, then, we get this post and it's like, oh, well, that's that I see myself in that. I get that.
Yeah.
And then, we all kind of share that moment together. And we do see in our data too that when people are posting online, when they're wanting to be part of a social media moment, a lot of it is about community and it's about sharing a connection with other people. We are, again, very isolated. And there is a sense of kind of coming together over the same thing, even if you think it's silly. If you see, I love that cup noodles comes out with a weird flavor every year now. The first one was pumpkin spice, and I think last year was s'mores. They've done breakfast, and it's like, that is ridiculous, but it's also limited time.
Right.
And it's also like only, they're not making their whole product brand around that. It's sort of like, oh, that's so silly. Did you see this? And that feels like very approachable and nobody's trying to make you buy it. It's just like, that's a fun one.
Yeah, it's like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. And we need that right now because when we are dealing with continued anxiety, flavor innovation gives us something to distract us. And we want that, but we also don't want that to take us too far out of the comfort zone that now we do feel unsafe. And I know that sounds kind of like, why would a flavor make us feel unsafe? But it is. It's sort of like, now we have to think about this. Like it gives us like a little bit of if we sort of put a nice little circle, Kelly can see me that I'm putting a little circle around myself. Like, this is where the flavor innovation is. Don't go too far outside of that line. The consumer right now maybe can't go on that journey too far with you.
Yes, exactly. Allowing those little small moments of experimentation can bring, that joy and excitement to something that's life can seem kind of, overwhelming at times. So
and joy is really important, paying attention to the mental health part. And, that comes out in a lot of ways for people. And, there's the functional ingredients. Yes. And that is very important. And then there's also, we had a trend a couple of years ago that I think is just continued to be, it's a truth now, called unguilty pleasures, where it's like, we shouldn't have to sneak that chocolate. We shouldn't have to say, oh, well, I just like, food is about joy and connection. Food is about, the function of keeping us alive and surviving, but it's also about helping us thrive as well.
Yes, perfectly said, I think. So I know there were some, at least to me, kind of surprises as I was reading the article. One of them was sweet corn and as a flavor. And I was like, there was a couple of different the experts that we spoke to that brought that up. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like a sweet corn cake with, buttercream frosting. That sounds like something I would delightfully eat. But I was wondering,
and
yeah, exactly. But are there any like flavors or profiles that you're like, ooh, I'm really going to keep an eye on this in the next 2 years or next year, that kind of stand out for you?
That's interesting. And I wonder if some of that is coming from, like Asian cuisine. Sweet corn is such a popular flavor in some of those cuisines. And I think from the data that we have, and I'm going to give you such a non-answer that, because what I've been noticing and what our numbers say, we ask consumers what their consumption is of different international cuisines. And we have the top 3 in the US, which have not changed. It is Italian, it is Mexican, and it is Chinese. And that is going to be Americanized versions of those 3. And if we look, though, at some of the other smaller little, not little, but some of the other cuisines in there, and we've got Thai, and we've got Japanese, and we've got Indonesian, and we've got the way we asked African, we didn't differentiate, but those tend to be a little bit lower, and we've got the 20% and things like that compared to the like 48% some of the other ones. But if you look at the generational data again, the Gen Zs and the millennials are the ones that are most likely to have tried or have eaten in the past 3 months those different, I'll say, more emerging cuisines. And then if you go back and then again look at those consumers who've eaten those cuisines, they're also the ones that are more likely to go out and try other things. They are food curious. They are the ones who are, they're looking for the trends. So it's like there is something happening where I think we don't have just one emerging flavor or cuisine. We have food curious young consumers who want to taste the world, who are going out and they're like, ooh, look at this. There's a new this kind of restaurant. I follow a lot of TikTok creators who go out in their local areas. I wish I would have thought to come up with some of their names right now. But there's this one in the like New Jersey area who goes in and she has Meta or Google glasses. I don't know if Google glasses exist anymore, but she never features herself and she goes in and she talks to the people who run these small restaurants and strip malls and she highlights the food of, she went into, I think, an Ethiopian restaurant and she was learning and they're just really highlighting like how they're learning about these cultures and these cuisines. And it's about, them just, the food is the journey, it's the experience, it's not just one flavor and then they're done. It's sort of like going with your friends to hot pot. Then the next day, maybe you're going to like Japanese, like yakiniku, and then maybe you're going to H Mart, and there's, especially in urban areas, and you see places like Walmart expanding what kind of, products that they have. And there's just a lot of interest in, and just the way that younger generations have more diverse groups of friends, and they're just learning from each other. So I think, I hope this isn't a cop out, but I think that we need to pay attention to the world, around us a little bit at a time. And, in this piece that I'm writing from the Summer Fancy Food Show, and what I saw as a trend spotter at that show, and what we talked about at the panel on the last day, is I saw a lot of emerging cuisines. There's a woman who's selling samosas from Mauritius. There were Nepalese momos that you can have. There are, Balkan pastries. There's so many, and then just reflected in, Kelly, you and I live in the western suburbs of Chicago, and just like all the little strip malls and all the things that you can try. And I think we're just going to see so much more accessibility and interest in all of those.
Yeah.
And I do think we can point to one area that has seen this happen is Korean food.
Oh, yeah.
And, a lot of that has happened through exposure in popular culture that's pushed that, because you see it, especially if you've seen K-pop Demon Hunters and all of the different foods that they're eating. And it's like, you can go now to Fox Valley Mall out in the suburbs, and you can go to a little ramen shop, like a store in there. You can heat up the little ramyun cup, and then you can recreate that. And I just hope, and I think that what we're going to see is, what is the moment of popular culture that might pop up for Indonesian food, or like what might pop up for, Belizean cuisine, or, and maybe it's going to be a social media moment, and like, it won't be for everybody, but like some people will experience this. And that doesn't make it easy for formulators. That doesn't make it easy for companies. But I think we saw that social media is where consumers are learning about things. And so social media is going to be important for us all to pay attention to. And we just might have to rethink what a huge flavor trend is going to be like. Because it's going to be different for everybody.
That's a great point, Melanie, because, in years, like when we've been doing this flavor trends article for years and years, and it used to be like very identifiable flavors, right?
Yeah.
Now it's more like, okay, people are wanting health and function, but also like, it's more than just one thing. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, and it wasn't a cop out. I think it's a very valid point, that is what's happening. We're bringing out it's so cool to watch. Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, for formulators and companies out there, social media listening and being aware of what is happening on that level is vital if they're going to, stay relevant. So,
and I will go ahead and plug that Mintel has acquired a company called Black Swan Data, and this is honestly, like, I'm plugging this, but I haven't gotten the chance yet to fully explore what this company does. But it's predictive social listening, where to look at the conversations that that consumers are having online, to be able to look at, based on what they're talking about, like, what are the products that can be created based on what they're saying now to meet those needs in the future, based on the timelines that companies actually have to prepare for this.
Right.
That's the biggest hurdle and barrier in where we are with social media. Like, can you achieve it before the moment is past? And so I always think there are other ways to meet the demands from social media other than product creation. Mm-hmm. There's other ways to get there, but maybe that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah, that might be a whole second segment. Yes. we'll circle back in 2026. Yeah. Awesome, Melanie. Thank you so much for taking the time to break that down with me. And it's so exciting to see all these emerging cuisines coming to the forefront. And I can't wait to try some of them. I will stop ordering number 10 at my local Chinese place every time I go.
There is no shame. There is no shame. You can just also order number 4 and then try that too.
Melanie Zanova Bartelme is Associate Director of Food and Drink at Mintel, where she leads global trend analysis across food and beverage categories. Read more about this year's hottest flavor trends, including the rise of spicy pairings and nostalgic comfort with modern twists, in the October issue of Food Technology. We'll be back with more Omnivore in a moment, but first, this word from our sponsor.
To the curious, to the bold, to the ones shaping the future of food, IFT is where you belong. As a member, you'll enjoy a global community united by purpose, driven by science, and ready to make a lasting impact on our food system. Connect with peers, thought leaders, and trusted experts. Stay on top of cutting-edge research and take your innovations and career further. You belong here. Become a member today at ift.org/join.
Welcome back to Omnivore. I'm Bill McDowell. Biodiversity is a word that many of us use, but few can define clearly. Yet it underpins a healthy, sustainable food system. Without biodiversity, our food supply becomes more vulnerable to climate disruptions, disease, and nutritional limitations. To explore what biodiversity really means and why it's so difficult to achieve, Food Technology's Mary Ellen Kuhn spoke with Abbey Thiel, a PhD food scientist and YouTube educator, to discuss the critical links between biodiversity, nutrition, and food security, and the technological innovations helping restore variety to the global food system.
Welcome to the Omnivore podcast, Abbey.
Thank you for having me here.
I'd like to start our conversation today by asking you some of the same questions that you posed in your recent article for Food Technology. So basically, what is biodiversity?
Yes, so biodiversity really at its core, is just looking at, the variety of life on Earth. But, for us food scientists, we might think of it a little more specific. So like biodiversity in food is really looking at, the range of crops or what livestock breeds or wild species, what microorganisms are we using to ferment food or what organisms live in the soil. So it's really about the diversity of life, but looking at it through the lens of, how is food grown and processed and what do we eat?
Well, you gave a great explanation here and also in the article. And one of the things that really struck me in the article is it's hard to believe that the food system is reliant on such a small range of crops. How do we get to this point?
Yes, no, I agree because, and I think I mentioned this in the article, like we go to the grocery store and you're like, we have such diversity of products, you think everything, might be biodiverse. But what I found when researching this article is that actually by the end of the 20th century, about 75% of the world's food supply came from just 12 plants and 5 animal species. And that's according to the FAO. So this, I mean, I agree, like in the store, you think like we have such diverse food products. But unfortunately, when I started to break it down, we often are planting like monoculture crops. Now, like with such a large food system, like sometimes processing or shipping, they're just really set up for like the default main crops. So getting something new in there is actually quite a lot of work. And then I will say, just as like humans, and I see this in myself and my family, we tend to always gravitate towards like foods we know or comfort foods. Like we don't often like go for the unfamiliar. So there's all these factors.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm betting that people really are not aware of this fact.
Mm-hmm.
Well, could you talk a little bit about why biodiversity matters in terms of the food system? And maybe you could start out talking a little bit, as you do in the article, about the whole food security issue.
Yeah, so this was very interesting to me. And maybe like the most important thing I sort of learned doing this research is that by cultivating like a more biodiverse food system is we can really get ahead of food insecurity or have people have greater access or availability of food is really one of the most, I would argue, immediate benefits, because if you grow different crops or different species or different cultivars, you're really reducing the risk that, something very bad happens to just those main crops we're growing, and therefore people go hungry. And so what is happening now is we, have this small number of staple crops. You might think about like your traditional wheat or corn or rice. And because we have like these 3 main crops, it actually makes us much more vulnerable, or our food system more vulnerable, just because, pests might come or certain disease might be an outbreak. So really like a key benefit would be that if we have more biodiverse crops, we kind of spread that risk out.
Again, that makes a lot of sense. And what about nutrition? Biodiversity also can contribute to improved nutrition, right?
Absolutely. And I found a couple studies that were looking at, oftentimes our diet has enough calories. Like we have food, of course, but we're really lacking some of those essential micronutrients. And what these studies were looking at is, is there the benefit of adding a broader variety of plants or animals to your diet? So some looked at like traditional or indigenous crops or crops that grow in the wild. And what they saw was that if you incorporate some of these lesser known crops into your diet, you sort of get a more full spectrum of different vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients. And I feel like gut health is like a very popular topic now. So I was also reading some research into this because your gut health, it impacts your immune system, digestion, disease prevention. And one study that I was reading sort of showed that with a more varied diet of some of these more unknown cultivars, you get this like wider array of fibers and polyphenols and different bioactive compounds that actually really help the beneficial microorganisms in your gut.
Well, as you said, that's such an important area, and I can only imagine that there's going to be more research into that in the months and years ahead. You made another interesting point in the article about the role of technology in contributing to biodiversity. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this was very fun for me because I got to interview some very cool and interesting people making a difference. And one person I talked to was Martha Montoya. So she's the CEO of Egg Tools Inc. And she is basically making this like digital platform or a way to analyze, what crops or what agricultural crops have maybe are good for biodiversity, are good for the food system, that type of thing. And so she was explaining to me that actually their system draws on more than 17 different variables. So they're looking at like, what are the climate patterns? Are there any regional cycles? Are there any labor disruptions to give sort of a fuller picture of certain crops and what might be viable at certain times in certain locations? And so they are hoping to sort of de-risk anything, these biodiverse crops or crops we aren't usually used to by allowing, greater predictability and transparency along these different supply chains.
Good explanation. And there are also some organizations that are getting more sophisticated in measuring biodiversity, right?
Absolutely. And I saw this more on food labels when I lived in Europe or Australia. Sometimes the labels have like a nutrition score, but the person I talked to actually is working on a planet score. So basically, like the grades you got in school, like A, B, C, D, E, but this would be like, is it good for the planet? So this is Planet Score, the company is called, and this is, they're making like an environmental friendly label that could be put on food. This is a French company, so this isn't over in the US. However, they told me they are already working with over 350 companies, which I thought was pretty impressive. And what they have is basically a score for the food or for the ingredient. And about 60 to 80% of the score is based on biodiversity. So basically, to get your own planet score for a food, they will look at, are you rotating crops? Are you using pesticides? What is your soil health or soil coverage? How do you manage your land? And then you can put this score, this label on your food to show consumers, what is your biodiversity or your planet score, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah, it seems like it would be a way of bringing this to the forefront for consumers too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think consumers are starting to think about, this type of thing and want to buy foods that are better for the planet.
Yeah, from what I've heard, that kind of resonates particularly with some of the younger generations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what about at the farm level?
Yes, one great example was this perennial grain. It's called Kernza, and it was developed by the Land Institute. And what I found so interesting about this grain is you actually don't have to annually replant it. And it makes this huge root system like 10 feet into the ground. So it helps with like soil erosion, and it helps filter the water. And of course, really cultivate like a ecosystem below the plant. And it's one of those, it helps sort of repair the environment almost. And then you can harvest it for food. So this is one initiative from the Land Institute. Another, I talked to a Dutch company doing sort of a similar thing. They're called Springtail. And in the Netherlands, they're more focusing on climate adaptive crops. So they're using like sorghum, rye, or heritage wheat. Basically, grains that can really thrive on like fewer inputs. But again, these grains, they're actually enhancing the soil, enhancing what microorganisms can live there. And so that's what Springtail is looking at. And they're working with sort of farmers so that they can locally rotate these crops and get the farmers away from more monoculture crops that we're currently utilizing.
I do remember from when I was working on editing the article, I saw a photo of that Kernza root system, and that was amazing.
Yes, it looks so interesting.
I was wondering if there were any of these initiatives that particularly impressed you in terms of their potential impact on biodiversity.
Yes, I remember my conversation. It was with Lisa Curtis. She founded the company Cooley Foods, and she is working with moringa, which I had never heard of. This is like a tree or plant that is grows in Africa. And what I thought was so interesting about what Cooley Foods is doing is she works with like the farmers, the very small farmers, works with all the family farmers, harvest the moringa. But she didn't, she's like, most Americans, they are never going to have heard of moringa. Like, I gotta make it familiar to them. And so what they are actually selling are more like value added products. So they have moringa matcha lattes, moringa gummies. They're, making it into energy bars. So it's really, they're taking this, unknown crop and really designing to like educate or introduce it to the US consumers, which I thought was like a very fun approach, because like we talked about earlier, like you kind of, as a human, you have your like comfort in foods, and that's what you go to.
For sure. Well, could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are very much a part of creating a biodiverse food system?
Yes, and this topic, I would say, came up in most of my interviews. So there's a lot of progress, a lot of challenges that still to be tackled. And one that I think really I talked about quite often with people is that there needs to be more funding and more collaborative research. So one, it's hard to get funding because the system is sort of set up for what we have, like the default, like it's cheaper to do the crops we know, do the monocultures, like the processing is set up. But we need to put money into these crops that can maybe help, heal the environment or help with erosion. And if we do fund that, we should start with like not just the farmers, but also the processors, the ingredient people, the product developers, like it really needs to be this collaborative project, because let's say the farmers really nail it and all the farmers change to, these more biodiverse unknown crops. Well, then it's not going to do any help if they don't have buyers or they don't have food companies that are going to, buy up these crops. So it's really, you need sort of like a system-wide collaboration.
I'm wondering if there's anything that comes to mind that could be done at a consumer level.
I think one easy choice would be, try to look when you're at the grocery store, see if you find any products with like underutilized crops, like see if you get sorghum or millet or teff or something like that instead of maybe your refined flour, just every once in a while, try something new, go beyond eating like the 5 big crops, like your wheat, rice, corn, soy, or potatoes, which I rely on those. Like those are my go-to. I get it. But I think if you start purchasing these more unknown cultivars, it helps create a demand for those types of products.
Well, so are you optimistic that embracing biodiversity can be more than just a fringe sort of thing?
I'm optimistic about it because I think at the farm level, in lab research labs, in product development teams, like the change does appear to be underway. It's happening, but I think we need more than just good intentions. And I think right now there's a lot of good intention from the people I interviewed. There are like the best people working on it, but we are going to need more change, like infrastructure or incentives or funding to really get, I think, a bigger shift in biodiversity.
Abbey Thiel is a food scientist whose YouTube series explores the science behind the foods we consume every day. You can read her article on biodiversity in the October issue of Food Technology.
Thank you to this episode's sponsor, IFT membership. To the scientists, students, collaborators, innovators, and leaders shaping the future of food, you belong here. IFT is your community for trusted knowledge, lifelong learning, and meaningful experiences and connections. Join us today at ift.org/join.
And that wraps up this episode of Omnivore. Thanks again to all our guests and my colleagues at Food Technology. Omnivore is produced and distributed by the Institute of Food Technologists. If you enjoyed today's show and want to learn more about Food Technology Magazine or how to join the conversation by becoming an IFT member, visit ift.org/membership. For more in-depth discussion about innovation in the science of food, Check out IFT's other podcast, Side Dish, on the News and Publications page of IFT.org. If you have comments or suggestions for future shows, just send us an email. The address is editors@ift.org. For the entire team at Food Technology and IFT, I'm Bill McDowell. Thanks for listening, and join us again for our next episode.